What I'm going to talk about today, I did not believe in for 36 years. Subtle energy, spirituality, that's all woo-woo. The problem is, it's not electromagnetic in nature. So even if your EMF meter tells you, oh, you have very low EMF, it could be full of electrosmog and it can't pick that up. You cannot block it. So living water is more like a crystal. It can hold the charge. Right? It has all these different properties. So think of this as two flows of energy coming together. And what do they form? Right? They create a vortex in that place, which if you complete it, it's what we call toroidal field. That's why the temples of the living are on the east side, because naturally the energy, because of the Nile, is going clockwise. While on the west bank, where the Valley of the Kings, Queens, and all the tombs are, the energy naturally moves counterclockwise, which moves energy back from the physical realm into the spiritual realms. But then the lady ended up calling, that took the pictures, she had been doing it for almost 15 years, called up one of the tower owners, said, like, what'd you do with that water? Like, well, we got this thing, it's called a cosmic tower, yada, yada, yada. It's like, why? Well, I've never seen this. I've been doing this for 15 years, but I've never seen rainbow hues come off the water. One day I asked the question, what if I had this whole thing wrong? And there is more, and a cat was out of the bag. Well, thank you everybody for coming. My name's Nico Martens. Thank you, Alex, Michelle, and Chris for having us. We appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for showing and for showing up. My name's Nico Martens, and I will be talking about subtle energy today, about the cosmic towers, about some of the challenges we face in our world today and what we can do about it. And I would like to start off with making it really clear that what I'm going to talk about today, I did not believe in for 36 years. Subtle energy, spirituality, that's all woo-woo, like, come on. If I could, like, I grew up in Belgium. I was born in Belgium and raised in Belgium, and I'm an electromechanical engineer, so my whole life's been science. And then I started working for an American company, Procter & Gamble in Brussels, and that's how I ended up in the United States, because I became the head of their cybersecurity. So I'm a total nerd. And for 36 years, I didn't believe in anything we're going to talk about today. But then, the universe, life has a way of humbling you. Grew up in Belgium and did the whole corporate thing, climbed the corporate ladder, was pretty successful. And then in 2010, my mother got diagnosed with stage 4 cancers pretty late when they caught it. And we did all the alternative things, and we did a lot of different things. But in 2012, she wanted to do euthanasia, which is legal in Belgium, because she wanted to be present when she passed and not full of painkillers and morphine and barely there. Even though my mother, she was a dentist, she didn't believe in anything spiritual either, or this woo-woo stuff. She just thought hey, it's like going to sleep and you never wake up. That's what dying is. And it's kind of silly for me to even talk about that in this way now, that I ever believed that at some point, but that's what we believed. So July 20th, 2012, she actually did euthanasia, which is, it's kind of weird. People passing, it's kind of weird to begin with, because it's a taboo subject. Everybody here knows we're going to die at some point, but we never talk about it. As if it's going to happen to everybody else, just not to us. For most people at least. So what happened was I went back to the US, and my mom was my best friend. I'm a total mommy's boy. And so I was really hitting rock bottom, and I was drinking a lot, doing anything I could get my hands on to numb the pain. It was kind of I felt like a hypocrite, because my mom wanted to stay off the morphine to be fully present, and I was sneaking it behind her back to numb out my pain. I couldn't deal with it. And then, so, I was going through hell, and then I decided to learn to meditate. Not because of anything spiritual, but just if I keep going down this path, I'm next. And I'd heard it could make you feel better. So I started to meditate, and then all these like weird things started to like happen. Like I'd be deep in meditation and I could feel somebody like stroke my cheek. And then I could smell my mother. Now my mother would appear in my dreams, like very vividly. And then I was starting, when I was deep in meditation, to get these thoughts where I was like, one day, like, it's so weird. It's just so not me, the thoughts that are coming up. And then one day I asked the question, what if I had this whole thing wrong? And there is more, and my mother's trying to reach out to me. And a cat was out of the bag. So I basically started to look into spirituality, all this stuff that I'd ignored for 36 years because it's not science, you can't measure it. And what happened was I got pretty good at communicating with my mother, but I wasn't quite sure. Maybe I'm making this shit up. So, so I met my first mentor through one of my friends. He was dating this girl, and her mother, Kelly, she became my first mentor. She was a Reiki master, and she had been born a natural channel. Ever since as a child, she could communicate with people that had passed. So we really hit it off, and we became friends. So every 2 weeks we would have lunch. Kelly, me, and Mom in spirit. And it was like my mother was at the table. I'm not talking trivialities here, right? I'm talking about, hey, when you were 10 years old, your mom's saying, tell me the story about when you were 10 years old and you did this thing in school and the teacher hit you and you ducked and your neighbor got hit. Like specific, like there's no way this lady could know this. So my mom's like, hey, Nico's really good at this. We can communicate, but I see he has some doubt, part of him. So I'm going to help him with that. So can you please relay this to him? And my mom was like, true, Kelly, here are 5 things about your future you cannot possibly know. And when they come true, you know you can trust this. So she predicted, so she was like, okay, your dad's going to have a new girlfriend soon. His new girlfriend's going to be 7 years younger than him. Her name's going to be Godeliva, like my mother's name, but she's not going to want to be called it. She's going to want to be called Leva, just like my mom. And then the first time you're going to meet her, your dad's going to get this special fruit cake that we used to get from this one bakery in Belgium. And like, sure, thanks. Like my dad calls me like a few months later and he's like, son, I got something to tell you. It's like, what, you got a new girlfriend? He's like, what? Oh, he's like, your sister, I can't believe. Like, I asked her for one time to keep her mouth shut. Oh no, blah, blah, blah. She has to tell you. I was like, Dad, Katrine didn't tell me. And he's like, well, then how do you know? I was like, Mom told me. And I'd already told them, like, because I was all excited. I was like, there is more. There is more. We had this whole thing wrong, right? But they were all like, Nico's going nuts, you know? And yeah, we've lost him. Oh my God, that's basically what my dad said. My dad's like, oh. So who told you then if it wasn't your sister? Well, Mom told me. Oh my God. Oh, you're talking to your dead mother again. Son, this is really bad. I just lost my wife and now I've lost my son. He's losing his mind. Like, what's next? It's like, but listen, I talked to my therapist about this and he said, like, you know what? If that makes him feel better, then let him. So I'm just gonna let you, son. Well, later he got it like dished out too, because my mom showed up in his bedroom one time, like there in the middle of the night. But that was basically like my awakening into this whole, like, holy shit, there's all this stuff that I've basically ignored for 36 years. And I was like, so what's true? So I made a promise for myself. I was like, you know what? I'm going to throw it all away, everything I've ever learned. And if it's true, it'll come back to me. So I started going down this path, and you know how the pendulum sometimes swings the other side. Like I was all scientific, and that doesn't exist, so I became like super spiritual, right? And so I'm like studying, and I was like, you know what? Like maybe it's for others, but this new age stuff's really like not for me. You know, the stories and everybody their thing, right? Angels and this, that. I had my experience, I had tons of experiences. But then I started learning about Tibetan rainbow body. Anybody familiar with Tibetan rainbow body? Okay, so Tibetan rainbow body is, and there's thousands of documented cases in Tibet about this, which is when a highly spiritual evolved being, like a high lama, when it's time to pass, they can decide whether they take their body with them or not, right? Like the Buddha didn't leave a body behind, right? He did what we call fire samadhi, and poof, he's gone. And so I started learning about this, and all these lamas that will shrink to where they're like little dolls and stuff. I was like, all these superhuman abilities, cities, levitation, moving stuff with your mind. I was like, that is what I want to learn about. And I'm an engineer at heart, so I want to see it with my own eyes. And I want to know how it works, and like, you know, but I had that sincere, not in like an ego way, but sincerely, I want to know, I can feel this is real, but I have to see it with my own eyes. And then in 2015, I quit my corporate job, which was kind of funny in a way too, because I worked for Hewlett-Packard at the time. And all my colleagues are, you like crazy, quitting such a job. And I'm like, you know what? You're crazy. What? I was like, well, AI is going to have your job 10 years from now. This was in 2015. I'm not exactly correct, but I am not far off either. You know, I was like, you're the crazy ones, you know? And so I quit my corporate job, and then I'll never forget it. I'm in a Reiki initiation in Surprise, Arizona. It's near Phoenix. Surprise, surprise. And, you know, I'm in this initiation, and my third eye is like wide open. And it was just me and the Reiki master are like present, nobody else. But in the room, in my third eye, there was clearly somebody standing in the corner of the room. Bright blue eyes, and he like kept staring at me. And I could feel him, like his presence very strongly. And then after the initiation, I asked my Reiki master, I was like, this might be a little weird, but there was somebody there in the room. Oh yeah, honey, like that's Max. He's a Taoist master. You'll meet him when it's time. It's like, ooh. And so he showed up in 2017, 2 years later. Like really weird, because he doesn't really advertise or anything. He finds you in a way. So I'm in a room with this, you know, Taoist master who basically has the equivalent of rainbow body. But in the Taoist traditions, it's called the golden dragon body. So, and he's old school. Like he teaches through his presence. I didn't know that at the time. So if you're ready, like just being around him is like enough. I didn't know that. So I'm like sitting there, and he's like shaking my hand, and he's holding it for like a minute and a half. He's just like looking right through me. He's like, good to see you again, Mr. Nico. He's got this smirk on his face. And I'm like, what does he know yet that I don't know? But anyway, I'm in the class, and he got basically trained by 28 different masters from all over the world, because they would recognize him. So he's like a high lama in the Tibetan traditions. You know, he learned from ancient lineage of Taoist masters. I mean, what I learned from him way precedes the Buddha. It's like over 5,000 years old. These are techniques that were developed in the Himalayas, a certain area, Kunlun. We call it like the top of the world in a way. So he learned from all these masters. He learned from Japanese shamans. He's all into Mongolian shamanism. He was hit by lightning when he's 9 years old, and his sky eye, we call it, went open. So he doesn't see you physically. He sees you as layers of dots of light. Like a year later, I was with him in a room or something. He's like, buddy, your stomach's sitting a little high. Come have a seat. You know, and because he could like look in your body like a human MRI. And so anyway, he's like shaking my hand. He's like holding it. I was like, whoa, what's going on? You know? And then he taught us, a small group, he taught us these ancient practices that he had learned. And I walked out of that room that day, and my mind was entirely blank. Like blank. I couldn't even think, am I ever going to have thoughts again? Like blank. It wasn't there. And this went on for like the rest of the day. I mean, it's the weirdest thing, like pure presence. Like there's no thoughts there. And then it profoundly changed my life. So that went on for the whole day. I went to bed. Next morning, my mind was back, and I had all kinds of shit to say about what had just happened. I'm like, okay, you're back. I miss you. No, I didn't. Like, right, it was back there. And then I'm like, okay, mine's back. Good, I guess, maybe not. I go to the bathroom and I look in the mirror. I was like, holy shit, what's that? And I had like 3 new moles in the center of my chest, and they were perfectly Orion's belt. So Orion's belt is what the pyramids in Egypt are perfectly in the alignment of Orion's belt, and I'll tell you later why that is. But I always had a fascination, by the way, with Egypt from a very young age. Like when I was 5 years old, like I saw a picture in Belgium in the pyramids, and I asked my mom, I said, Mommy, where are those? They're in Cairo, they're in Giza, in Egypt. Nico said, Mommy, I have to go back there. Back there? What are you talking about, you silly boy? And so this Orion's belt shows up like on my chest, the biggest moles, boom, that I have in the front of my body, boom, 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 overnight. I was like, what is that? So anyway, I'll get to that later. That didn't make any sense at the time until I went to Egypt. A few years later, it started to make sense. So that was really like for me, and I saw the superhuman stuff with my own eyes. And that's what I wanted. So limbs disappearing, his top student who can basically teleport. And I was like, see, I knew this shit was like real, and I had like seen it. So that's also when my spiritual path became a lot easier because I wasn't looking for anything anymore. I knew the path in a way, and I just knew what to do because he would always teach old school. It's a water path. It's not a fire path. Most spiritual schools on this planet are fire path, which is all about bringing the dormant potential up, right? Kundalini. Water path's the opposite. You don't have to become anything else. You're already it. You only have to let go of what you're not. And then it's already there, which is the hardest thing to do for human beings. Like basically, like get out of the way. And your body, your being already knows, and it's already there. So I went through that spiritual awakening, like, very quickly. And then I kept running into like shamans all over the world. Like it says like shamans here or something on my forehead. I just keep running into them. Doesn't matter what tradition. I know about 50 of them in Europe. I was working with this New Zealand Maori shaman, like everywhere. I don't know. They just come on my path. Never looked for them. But anyway, so that's like my whole, like how my spiritual journey started, not by choice, right? And ultimately, like for me, that's why I love talking to skeptics, because I was that like 500%, right? And it's not because you don't believe in something that it isn't true. So it completely changed. My complete worldview changed. So I had seen it with my own eyes. I had experienced it. I was like, now I want to understand the science behind it, right? And because to me, science is the observation of phenomena, and these are phenomena. So why doesn't mainstream science talk about this stuff, right? I don't know the answer. But so I got really interested. I started digging into the science of what I basically had experienced. I mean, and I didn't study anymore because something was missing, just pure curiosity. Like the little boy taking a radio apart when you're 6 years old and you can't put it together. Again, your dad's really pissed, but I just wanted to know how stuff worked, right? So that's where I basically started to learn what I call the ancient sciences that we're remembering now. So why is that so important, and why am I bringing this up? Well, because the science that I learned in school, and most of us, it's very myopic. It like considers like less than 1% of the spectrum of reality, and it's like, boom, this is all there is. Everything else is like woo-woo, or it doesn't exist and you can't measure it. And because of that, we have made some really terrible decisions from a technological point of view. And I will be talking a little bit about that, and then also the sciences that I've learned. I'll briefly go through it because that gave me a lot of the answers. I was that annoying kid in class. Well, annoying period, but especially in class, right? The first book my mother bought me when I learned how to read by myself. I couldn't wait for school. Mom was helping me. I was reading books when I was like 5. And the first book she bought, I'll never forget, it was in Dutch, Hoe en Waarom. 1,000 questions and answers. And then the deal was, Nico, if you have a question, you go look in the book. And then when the answer's not there, you can come ask me because it's driving her nuts. Right, so I started to learn about all these like alternative science. Many of you are probably familiar with Dan Winter. But I started studying with Robert Gilbert. Are you familiar with Robert Gilbert? He passed away a few years ago, but he's basically he was the teacher, and he's the one that brought biogeometry to the US. And biogeometry was invented by Dr. Karim, Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Egypt. So I got really interested in studying these alternative sciences because, as I said, in school, always in trouble, 15 years old. I mean, the teacher tells me that space is empty. Okay, I can wrap my head around that. And then 3 weeks later, she tells us in class that light waves travel all the way from the sun to the earth. Ma'am, yes, Nico. How is that possible? You said space was empty. Yeah, what's the problem with that? I was like, how can you have a wave if it's empty? Don't you need something to vibrate? Don't you need a medium? Do you need something? Well, okay. Well, as usual, you're running ahead of things. You're going to learn next year how light is also a particle. Like, what? It's a wave and a particle, Nico. You're running ahead of things. I was like, explain that to me. Well, it's like a particle, and then when it comes close to the earth, it becomes like a wave again. I was like, so you're telling me that light is like schizophrenic? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? Of course, now I know. Yeah, because space not empty, right? There's an ether, and it's everywhere. And we've known about this, for thousands of years, right? But it was all these things. But it started to make sense to me when I was learning these new sciences, which I call ancient sciences that we're remembering. So why is that so important? Because of these technologies, these technology choices that we've made. So what I studied basically, anybody ever heard of radiesthesia? Okay, so most of you are familiar with dowsing, right? Which is basically the most, the example that most people know is like if you want water on your property in a well, you're not going to start digging like a fool, right? You bring a water dowser over and they're going to tell you, okay, right there, you dig this deep, that's the volume of water that you get. Well, that's the science that's based on is radiesthesia, which radiesthesia is a form of dowsing, but dowsing gets kind of a bad rep because we think about people with the pendulum and asking it questions, yes or a no. And don't get me wrong, there's people that can do that really well, right? But you also need to be really clear in your mind, in your subconscious mind. You cannot have any biases or it's going to affect your measurements, right? So radiesthesia is actually a way to do dowsing, to do those types of measurements, but we don't ask questions. The tools are created to where they have a resonance with the energies that you're measuring. So you never ask any questions. You just hold your awareness and then you calibrate the tool, and it will basically tell you whether that particular energy quality is there or not. So this has been around for thousands of years, right? The Egyptians, you can see it in the hieroglyphs, their tools, and I'll get into each of them in a little bit. But basically, this has been there for thousands of years because when we got satellites that could detect gold, they went in the Sinai Desert everywhere they could find traces of gold with the satellites, and the Egyptians had been to all of those places. In World War II, the Germans used radiesthesia to find landmines. They taught it to the Marines in Vietnam for underground tunnels and stuff to find them. So this has been around for thousands of years. And it's really the French and the Germans that when modern science was developing, that kept developing this ancient science of radiesthesia, which is basically the ability to measure the subtle energies, the subtle realms, right? Science looks at this 1% sliver and says, that's all there is. But then there's this 99% that gets tossed out of the window. Right? When I learned biogeometry and a different model from Dr. Kareem, it very much reflects what we know from spiritual traditions, that all is one, right? That there is an ether, that there is faster than light communication and all of that, which is scientifically proven also, right? That's where my beef life lies with science, which is if you're a true scientist, you observe the phenomena and you have a hypothesis, but if there's something that disproves that, you throw it all out, right? But we stopped doing that because, oh my God, it's my paycheck and it's these interests, right? So it became, to me, science is like the biggest cult on the planet right now, you know? So so you have this radiesthesia, which is basically allowing you to measure these subtle energies. You know, why is that so important? Because what we consider the physical realm is actually being shaped by all these subtle realms that science ignores, right? And when I learned biogeometry, Dr. Kareem basically took the work that the French and the Germans furthered, and then he even built on top of it, and he made even he added some qualities to it, which I'll explain in a little bit, and different tools that allowed you to, for example, measure where sacred power spots are on the planet, to measure a lot of different qualities. And so let's look, for example, on what's on most people's minds now, which is non-native EMFs, or call them man-made EMFs, right? Or technologies, Wi-Fi, 5G, you name it. I'm a total computer nerd, so I'm all for that stuff. We wouldn't be here together, right, if it weren't for these technologies. But the problem is it cannot be at the detriment of our health and our environment, right? So I deal with a lot of people that are electrosensitive. And I always, I get this quite a bit, which is, Nico, I don't know what to do anymore. We moved out of the city. Everything's wired in our house, but I'm still having the symptoms. And I went to my doctor, and my doctor says psychosomatic. It's just in my head. I was like, no, do you think that's the case? I'm like, no, it's not. Because again, science will only use an EMF meter when we're talking about EMFs, right? But an EMF meter can't really tell you anything other than the strength of the field. But I could have two electromagnetic devices here, and one is a healing device, right? And the other one is a weapon, a radiation weapon. That EMF meter will tell you how strong the field is, but nothing about the quality of the energy. That's like me offering you two potions. What are you interested in? The quantity, the dose, or the quality, whether it's a poison or a supplement? Most of us would be like, I want to know the quality first. An EMF meter cannot do you that, cannot tell you that, right? It'll only give you the strength of the field. So that's the limitation, because our science is all about quantity. How strong, how many of what, but never about quality. And quality comes first. And then comes the quantity. So let me expand a little bit on the EMF, because most people know like the basics and they'll go measure it, right? But why this lady that has everything wired now, lives outside the city, why does she still have the symptoms when there's like nearly zero EMF in their home? Well, because EMF causes way more chaos than just in the electromagnetic spectrum. So first of all, in biogeometry and in radiesthesia, we call it creates vertical negative green. And I don't know why they called it negative green. It comes from the French, but it's basically a carrier wave, is what we call negative green. So think of it like X-rays, microwaves, all the technologies we use for communication, they have a carrier wave. And a carrier wave is what allows you to spread information far and wide. So we talk about horizontal and vertical waves that we measure. Horizontal ones are beneficial to life. Verticals are typically detrimental. Think of vertical moving energy out of this realm, and horizontal keeping it in this realm. So we have vertical negative green. So a carrier wave of this detrimental vertical quality. And so there's a bunch of things, a bunch of effects that have. One of them is that vertical negative green dehydrates any living organism. Let's think of something that's very high in vertical negative green, a microwave. What happens when you put a steak in a microwave? Right? Bone dry is how it comes out, right? Because all the water bonds get broken. It basically gets dehydrated. Right? But then the other thing is like put an egg in a microwave for only a few seconds and then try to grow a chick out of it. It's not going to happen, right? All the life force is gone. There's no life. It's dead, right? So we had this brilliant idea of like, let's just turn the whole planet into a giant microwave, right? And then the stupidity, right? It's like, oh, we got to go electric because the Earth's like heating up. I said, are you guys stupid? Like, now you're going to go more and more electric. So what are you doing? You're doing even more waves. What do waves create? Friction. What does friction create? Heat. So we're actually exacerbating the problem, right? We're doing that. So these EMFs have this vertical negative green quality. And a lot of people only look at the primary effect of EMF, which we can measure. With your meter, you can measure the further you go away from the source, the electromagnetic radiation goes down. You can put up a Faraday cage and you can block it, right? But there's also a secondary effect of EMF. And that's why this lady I was talking about in the beginning, that's why she was still having the symptoms, because the secondary effect is not electromagnetic in nature. And your EMF meter cannot pick it up. So the best way for me to describe this is like, so we live all in the ether, this one energy, right? And the ether has like fluid-like properties. And it's like water in a way, and it has, to try and explain to a human what ether is, like trying to explain to a fish what water is, right? They're made up of water, they're born in water, it's always there. It's like right under our nose, we're made up of it, so it's hard for us to even grasp. But think of the ether being fluid in nature. So what happens if you have an EMF signal, whether it's a Wi-Fi router or whatever? So you have this signal traveling through the ether. Think of that as a boat traveling through water. And most of you, close to the ocean, if you see a boat, you have that big wave, or if you're in a canal, think of that as the electromagnetic frequency. And that dies off pretty quickly and the big wave is gone. What happens long after the boat is gone? You have all these little ripples and they linger. If you have multiple boats, they all start interacting with each other and they form what we call standing waves, which are always there. Bottom line, the water is never still anymore, right? The other way you could think of it, of the EMF, it's like the rain coming down, the fog that lingers, is what we call electrosmog. So electrosmog, you can think of it as a disturbance in the ether that is like always there in the background. The problem is it's not electromagnetic in nature. So even if your EMF meter tells you, oh, you have very low EMF, it could be full of electrosmog and it can't pick that up, right? The other thing is like, you cannot block it, right? So what we call scalar waves, which are a different type of wave, and it will travel right through any insulation or isolation, so we can block from this. And it's not electromagnetic in nature, but it disturbs all levels of our being. When I talked about those subtle realms beyond what science exists, I mean, in biogeometry, we break it up in the energetic level, the emotional plane, the mental plane, the spiritual plane, and then it's even divided up more. So we can actually measure in 54 different planes of nature. Any substance, any person, any place, and we can measure the energetic qualities on all layers of existence. Now, the issue with this EMF is that it creates a disturbance on all of those layers. And the EMF signal is there 24/7, right? So think of it like you might not be able to hear it, but your cells are listening to death metal 24/7, right? And it's really disturbing your balance. So what are we going to do? Oh, you can't block yourself from it. And this is where harmonization comes in. And this is where my Egypt story comes in too. So when was it? Right after COVID, whenever that was, 2019 or 2020 or something. I was helping a Maori shaman from New Zealand. And I'd met him randomly, through other shamans in Europe or something, in Belgium, this way. And we hit it off, and I was like, man, I want to help you get your stuff out there in the world. So I built him a website, helped him build courses and stuff. And then one day it's like, you haven't been to Egypt? I was like, no, but I want to go. It's like, why don't you come with me? I was like, okay. So we go to Egypt, and it just happened to happen that we ran into the elder that lives in the first house by the Sphinx. And her name's Scheherazade Awiyan. And Scheherazade is the daughter of Abdel Hakim Awiyan. And Abdel Hakim Awiyan, he started chemtology decades ago because he says what the Egyptologists tell you is a bunch of bullshit about the pyramids and the temples. Let me tell you what I learned from my ancestors about this technology, about these places. And so Abdel Hakim Awiyan, you can actually see him. There's a documentary on YouTube called The Pyramid Code. He's in there and he talks about what he learned from his ancestors. So anyway, he passed away years ago, and then Scheherazade continued his work. And she's in her 70s now. So I met her with the crazy Maori shaman, some other person. We meet her, and she looked at me and she started crying. She's like, well, why are you crying? She's like, you came back. You promised you would. And I still get goosebumps when I talk about this, right? And I was like, wow. She's like, you came back. She's like, I was like, Scheherazade, let me ask you something. When I met this like Taoist master, who later I found out is also a high priest in Egyptian mystery school. And she's like, this happened. I woke up the next morning in Orion's belt. There's 3 new moles and they're in the center of my chest, perfectly Orion's belt. She's like, sweetie, look. And she pointed to the corner of her eye. And she had the exact same marking. She's like, that's how we recognize each other in other lifetimes. And then later I found out from my Taoist teacher that if you'd been in these Egyptian mystery schools, we imprint your vital organs. Not only so you have the signs so we can recognize you, but also for your own remembrance. Because every time I look in that, it's like informing me and it's waking me up. And so I meet Scheherazade there, and we become really good friends. And we started doing tours in Egypt. And I had this weird thing in the temples in Egypt. So who's ever been to Egypt? You have? Okay. So the rest you haven't. So when you go to Egypt, you will find 2 sets of guards. You have the government guards, and then you have the lineage, father to son, 35 generations. And you can see it, their eyes look different. They have a different light in their eyes. Colors of their eyes are different. And I would have a lot of like run-ins with those guards. They'd be like, oh, welcome back. I know you Egyptian. Come on, I have to show you something. And they would let me in parts of the temple that were closed off. Like, shh, you just sit there a half hour, come get you later. It's like, what the heck's going on? Right? So I got to see the temples in a very different way. And then also, I mean, let's be clear about this. The Egyptians, whoever built the pyramids were clearly a much higher civilization. All right? I mean, and even my Egyptologist friends, because I've lived in Luxor now, I'm finishing a condo there, but I've lived there for the last 5 years. So everybody knows me on the West Bank in Egypt, and I'm like part of the family in Egypt. And so I got to know a lot of the Egyptologists. They became personal friends of mine. And we'd be in a coffee shop, and I'd be like, Sayed, come on. Pyramids built with like ramps and slaves. He's like, I know, Nico. It is impossible. It is completely impossible. 2.4 million blocks. They say it took so many years. According to my calculation, they had to put a 30, 40 ton or even heavier block with perfect precision every 3.5 minutes. It is not possible. I was like, then why do you keep telling people this bullshit? He's like, I have to, or I lose my license, I lose my job if I do not tell this story, right? So they all know that is a bunch of nonsense. Also, they were in tombs, right? They never found any mummies in there or whatever. But actually, when I was in the King's Chamber, we got like a private permit. So we have it to ourselves from 5 till 7 in the morning with our group. And I remember when I was laying in the box, which is not a sarcophagus, it's a resonance box. They also moved it off where the power spot is because some weird things happened there. But I know when I laid in, I remember the sound to make. And it just came to me and was making that sound, and like the whole box would start vibrating and the whole King's Chamber would be vibrating. And then we videoed it and we came out of the pyramid. Hey, show those videos where you made the whole room shake. There was no sound on the recording and it was loud in there. So I don't even know where that sound went. So the reason I'm bringing up ancient Egypt, because like, yeah, clearly a much higher civilization. Right? What did these ancient civilizations do? And I'm just using Egypt as an example because I spent so much time there and I have a close affinity to it. But all ancient civilizations did this. What do we find all over the world? Temples, right? Pyramids. And like a lot of people think it's about the temples, but it really isn't about the temple per se. Because what happens when you dig under a temple or a church? You find an even older one. You dig under it, you find an even older one. Guys, you get so much space. Like, why are you guys all building on top of each other? Well, because it's not about the temple, but it's what naturally already there, which is sacred power spot. All right. And for those who are not familiar with sacred power spots, most people are familiar with energy meridians in the body and acupuncture points. Think of it as acupuncture points of the earth. Right. So basically, we have these sacred power spots. Most people are very familiar with the ones in Sedona, right? And the vortexes, right? So those ancient civilizations, they would figure out where these power spots were. And what they would then do is they would build the temple in geometries and ratios with materials and shapes that would take the energy that's naturally present at that power spot, amplify it, and then spread it. That's why if you go to the East Bank in Luxor, you see Karnak, Luxor Temple, they're all connected through roads, which is how you then spread those energies. So what creates that sacred power spot there? Well, first of all, what does a sacred power spot do? Well, it makes you feel good. And it helps you to heal, right? A lot of people, where I'm from in Europe, we all know about Lourdes in France, when people go to drink the water and there's miraculous healings and this, that, right? That's an example of a power spot. Because what do all power spots have in common is water, right? So what creates a sacred power spot? It's basically underground water crossings. Are most of you familiar with living water? Yay! I was in Oklahoma City like a few weeks ago. Are you familiar with living water? Fort Face one? Mr. Emoto? Guy with the pictures? Yeah, that guy. So you know what living water is? So water, and Alex can talk much more about this than I can intelligently, but it's basically the water in our bodies and living organisms, not like tap water. So we called Fort Face water, living water. Gerald Pollack did a lot of work around this, University of Washington. And we could make this whole talk about living water and still be here a week from now. But in a nutshell, living water behaves very differently, has very different properties than what we tap water or something, which is dead. All right. So living water is more like a crystal. It can hold the charge. Right? It has all these different properties. So if we look at it more energetically, you basically have two flows of energy, of really high energy, of charged water. And that charged water, by the way, is more like primal water. It's been there for tens of thousands of years. And it has all these healing frequencies in it that it picked up from the rocks and the minerals. So think of this of two flows of energy coming together. And what do they form? Right? They create a vortex in that place. which if you complete it, it's what we call toroidal field. Most of you familiar with a toroidal field, the torus, the donut shape, that, okay. Yay. So, great crowd. So, is water that creates these sacred power spots. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the ancients, right, they knew it. And what they would do is work, like temples were not built on the earth. They were built with the earth. Right? Why do you think these ancient structures are still here tens of thousands of years later? And you'll be lucky, I mean, no offense, but one of these homes, if 100 years from now, if it's still standing, right? Because the structures we build are dead. A temple is alive, right? It was built in accordance with the forming process of nature. That's also the other reason why no slave could have ever built a temple, right? Because before you were even allowed to touch a block on a temple, you had to be free. You had to go through spiritual initiations. You had to go through cleansing, and you were a stonemason, and you had to be free, a free mason, which then later that got co-opted as something different, but that's where that comes from originally, right? So, yeah, they built these temples to basically create harmony, not only for the people living in their civilization, but the land, the unseen realms, the animals, the plants. And let me tell you something. I was in Bali for the first time this winter. Anybody ever been to Bali? So you, of course. You arrived the day I left. Like, no coincidence. But let me tell you something about Bali. Like, this was one of the, they have a lot of tourism now and a lot of westernization, but the Balinese, 3 times a day, they do what they call chanang sari, which are these offerings that they make. For every business does it, every home does it, to where they basically create balance between the seen and the unseen realm. Like, if there's a bad accident on the road in Bali, not long after that, they'll shut everything down and they'll do a ceremony in the middle of the street for an hour, and traffic has to just deal with it, right? Because they have to balance the energies again. And that was for me, such a pristine place, because the next room up, we call the astral plane, completely clear, and there's no ghosts hanging around, no funky stuff going on. Like, you can really feel that, right? And I believe all higher civilizations also were very much aware of these realms and would create that balance, right? So what can we learn from the ancients? Is really to create all this harmony, right? And because I talked earlier, EMF, you can't block it, you can't hide from it basically anymore, because this electrosmog goes everywhere. So what do? Well, we have to harmonize it. And what does harmonization mean? Harmonization doesn't mean you block the energy, you shield yourself from it. Harmonization means we change the quality of the energy to where it's no longer detrimental for living beings, but actually beneficial. Right? And a prime example of that is one of my teachers, Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who started biogeometry. He got called into Hamburg, Switzerland in early 2000s. And what had happened in Hamburg was they had put cell phone antennas in the church tower. Everybody started to get sick in that town. People couldn't sleep. People had anxiety, depression, no zest for life. People were all fighting and aggressive. And that's just the people, right? But then the animals, all the wildlife fled the area. And then the animals that couldn't flee, like cows, for example, they started to have miscarriages. The animals that were being raised, for meat production, when they processed the animals, they noticed that they had tumors on the meat. And the locals were getting really pissed off and demanding the government to do something about it. Like any other government, they're like, yeah, whatever. You guys keep complaining. So one day the Swiss decided enough's been enough, and they were going to burn and blow up all the cell phone towers. So that's when they got the attention of the government. So the government and Swiss Telecom, they're like, what are we going to do about this? Well, Dr. Kareem, he's actually an architect. His dad was a famous architect that did a lot of the modern architecture in the Middle East. And Dr. Kareem, he had studied in Switzerland as an architect, and they also knew that he was more into like subtle energies and, you know, into energetics. So they called Dr. Kareem in. So Dr. Kareem shows up. So what do you guys do? Well, we put antennas in the tower. He's like, oh, that's a terrible idea. They're like, yeah, we found out. Can we fix this? Oh, yeah, that's really easy. Oh, thank God. Is it hard to do? No, it's super easy. Thanks. What do we do? Take those antennas out of the church. They're like, no, we can't do that. We have to keep them there. Can you do something else? It's like, yeah, I can. It's just going to take me some time. So he did his measurements with the radiesthesia that I talked about, which are tools. You can measure all these subtle energies that underlie this physical run. And then he started to make adjustments. And he used shapes in strategic positions. So biogeometry is basically how the language of nature is shaped. In a way. So he was using shapes to harmonize the energies. So he did his work, and then he got all of it done, and they're all looking at him like he's crazy, right? These are all your mainstream scientists, right? Like, this guy's going to put some shapes there and fix it. Like, come on, give me a break, right? It's a sure thing. He's like, I'm done. Good. And the people were already feeling better. And then the government doctors came in, and they because they were doing studies, right, before and after. And then, yeah, sure thing. They noticed all the symptoms started going away and massive improvements in a matter of weeks. Of course, there's always the infinite detractors, right? Oh, that's placebo effect. He didn't do anything. He just put some, this placebo effect. Dr. Kareem's like, well, unless your cows speak Arabic, I do not know how this could be placebo effect, because the cows stopped having miscarriages, right? No more tumors on the meat. And then within a year, all the wildlife had come back to that place. And the mayor was like super happy, and they actually gave him the key of his town. And it wasn't so much about because his people were having physical ailments and this and that, but for him, he felt like he had lost his community. Because when that was happening with the EMF, nobody would go to church anymore. Everybody was fighting and bickering, and people were irritated, didn't have any energy to do anything. He's like, you gave me my town back. Thank you. So they call that the miracle of Hamburg. And you can find it all over. Like, it was in the news in Switzerland. It's in the newspapers. They did elaborate studies on it. Right? And the reason I'm bringing it up is because that's the principle of harmonization. Right? And Dr. Kareem just did it in another way. And the reason I'm bringing up sacred power spots and temples is because that's where the cosmic tower comes in. So should we start building temples everywhere? Yeah, we could. But we probably won't be that successful. So if I were to explain in one paragraph what the cosmic tower is, it's like a sacred power spot, but portable. Okay? So if we go back to what creates a sacred power spot in nature, it's that underground water crossings, right, of living water. So what's in a cosmic tower? So a cosmic tower has like two vessels of water in it. So one at the bottom, one at the top, and it has a crystal in the center. And then these vessels, these glass vessels, are filled with a special mixture of healing waters. And the inventor and his son was, because the inventor, Harold Tears, who passed away a few years ago, but his son was basically the one that had the spiritual connection. Because Harold was like me, like an electromechanical engineer, and then he has this son that's like fully open and can communicate with spirits, with other dimensions. And one day I asked his dad, he's like, Dad, have you forgotten why we came together this lifetime? His dad's like, apparently I have, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me. But Dad, we have to build a new energy grid, a new light grid. And I need your help, because I can talk to upstairs and figure the energy out, but you're going to have to help me build like the device. right? And that's how the cosmic tower started. So his son was like, hey, Dad, we need to write water. Okay, son, how are you going to find that? Well, we need a combination of living water from healing wells, but I don't know which ones they are. So through all these coincidences, synchronicities, some lady comes on their path that had a collection of over 600 samples of water from healing wells from all over. And then his son went in and he intuitively knew, he's like, that one and that one. And when they put them together, his son claimed, like, okay, now we have the perfect rainbow spectrum of light present within this living water by putting these two together. And he just trusted his son back in the day. But then later, years later, that was actually measured and he was right. So the inventor would call it rainbow water. So what you have now is you have a living water full of charge with the full rainbow spectrum of light present within the water. Then what happens is after they're physically produced, it gets the device gets activated, and basically the water in the bottom is programmed to go counterclockwise. The water in the top to go clockwise. And don't think of it like physically, if you would look at it, the water spinning around in there, but think about subatomically. Everything's energy, like we talked about. We have the ether, but everything's rotating, everything is spinning. And the Russians call this torsion fields. They've done hundreds of thousands of studies on this. They have patents around this. They created devices based on this principle, which is also, okay, this is also why in Luxor, the Valley of the Kings and the Queens of the Dead is on the West Bank. The temples of the living are on the East Bank, right? Because if you look at torsion fields, what they figured out, if the energy is going counterclockwise, it actually pulls energy out of this realm. If it's going clockwise, it puts energy back into this realm. So that's why, think of the Nile. The Nile, it always trips me up when I'm in a boat in Luxor. It feels so backwards that the Nile is going from south to north. Right? But the Nile, water, living water, massive energy stream flowing up. What do you get when a boat goes through water? Right? You get two vortexes, right? Which on the east side, clockwise. On the west side, counterclockwise. That's why the temples of the living are on the east side, because naturally the energy, because of the Nile, is going clockwise. While on the west bank, where the Valley of the Kings, Queens, and all the tombs are, the energy naturally moves counterclockwise, which moves energy back from the physical realm into the spiritual realms. That's also why you see the Sufis going counterclockwise when they do their, right? I mean, the bigger problem is, so even in spiritual tradition, even you with your device, you have very different effects. If you spin somebody clockwise versus counterclockwise, you probably shouldn't spin them clockwise at nighttime because they might be up for a while, right? That's because of that effect. Now the problem is that all of our man-made technologies create counterclockwise, right? But it's not connected to life. It's not connected to a life force. So it's all these counterclockwise energies from EMF and stuff are like cancers in our energetic realm. Right? It's very different from a Sufi that's centered and connected using that counterclockwise spin. Right? So basically everything spins. So, right? So the Russians call that torsion fields. So with the cosmic tower, that's going counterclockwise, that's going clockwise. What does that create? It creates a toroidal field. Right? And then once that is activated, it gets connected, it has its own source connection. So there is a continuous throughput of energy coming off this cosmic tower. So it behaves like a sacred power spot in nature. So what are the benefits of a sacred power spot and as such of a cosmic tower? First of all, anywhere within its range, your water is going to get structured. So you open a faucet here, the water is going to get structured because of the action of the toroidal field. Plus, then it also gets imprinted, gets infused by the qualities of the water within here, which is the full rainbow spectrum. And you can look on our website because There were Cosmic Tower owners in Holland that wanted to test that, and they actually sent pictures to a lab. So they took samples in 3 locations of tap water, sent it to the lady that took pictures like Missouri Motor or Veda Austin, and so they looked at what the water looked like. To be expected with tap water, terrible structure, a lot of distortion, no life force present, no vitality. And then they took another sample from that same tap water, put it with a tower for 2 minutes and sent it. And then you can see the beautiful fern structures in the water indicating vitality. But then the lady ended up calling that took the pictures. She had been doing it for almost 15 years, called up one of the tower owners, said, like, what'd you do with that water? Like, well, we got this thing, it's called a cosmic tower, yada, yada, yada. It's like, why? Well, I've never seen this. I've been doing this for 15 years, but I've never seen rainbow hues come off the water. So I was wondering what you guys did. So that's basically the qualities of this water that got imprinted into that tap water, right?
And that's what we're doing now.
Yes, and that in and of itself has so many benefits, right? It doesn't end there, but that's because when you have a cosmic tower, I mean, we get a lot of feedback, but a lot of times it's also about plants, or plants have just exploded. You know, everything's growing like crazy. That's because, you know, the structuring of the water, but also because of a harmonious energy field. So it basically creates a harmonized energy field. You know, we talked about the EMFs and it creating electrosmog. So the cosmic tower can harmonize all of that, like Dr. Karim did in Switzerland. Exact same principle, different way of doing it. Right? So does that mean if you go look with your EMF meter, same exact strength of your EMF signal, right? Because if any device could truly block EMF, well, all your shit stops working too, right? So basically the tower creates that harmonized environment. So with your EMFs, they get harmonized. But there's more than electrosmog, because guess what else creates smog? Are negative thoughts, negative emotions. That's why sometimes in cities, you're like, ugh, you know, and you're in nature and you feel much better. So we create that smog all the time too, with our emotions and our thoughts. And then there's so many other benefits, and people always ask, does it heal this? Does it heal that? I was like, Cosmic Tower doesn't heal anything. It creates a harmonious energetic field. Your body already knows how to heal itself. We just have to create an inner and outer environment so the body knows what to do, right? But what really drew me to the project was because I'd been looking, like being the uber nerd and stuff, and me figuring out like these EMFs are probably not good for you. And I've been working in data centers and stuff my entire life. So I was already looking into it, but I couldn't find anything that I particularly liked until I, through coincidence, met the inventor in Europe. And what really stood out with this project was that all other EMF things that I played with, either they use electricity. That was stupid to me. Like, electricity causes the problem. Like, why does it need electricity to like work? Okay, get it. But then other devices were just about like protecting yourself. And yeah, I can get that. Protect yourself and your family, but what about nature? All right? Because one of the things we've forgotten because of our myopic science is like nature's being treated as this thing that doesn't know what it's doing, and we gotta show it how it's done. We gotta take over. Right? You are nature. You're a part of nature. You know, when nature dies, we die with it, and nature will not die. I'm sure nature's going to be here whether we're going to be here. That's going to be a different question. And that really requires us to make a shift to where we stop cannibalizing nature and become stewards again for nature. And that's what really drew me to the project, because, you know, he was talking about, and I'll go through the different towers in a second, and I'd love to invite you up to share some of your experiences. But we have them in different sizes. And what really excited me is that the inventor was talking about these really big ones, 7-8 foot towers that could harmonize for 250 miles, right? Or over 300 miles. And that's what really got me excited. So I went after the talk because these were shamans that had sent it to me from Belgium. Like, you probably know what this is. And I was like, holy shit, I just happened to have a trip to Europe in like 2 weeks that I was going to cancel. It was right around COVID. But now I'm definitely going to come. And then through some synchronicities, I ended up meeting the inventor twice. And we immediately hit it off. And I was like, you know what? I'm from Belgium. You know, I can speak German and all that. Like, what can I do to help you bring this to the US? We need this, right? Because he was a force of nature. He had sold like over 25,000 of them in like 4 years' time or something. He would travel all through Europe, you know, over 800 of the big ones. And the big ones are what excited me. So when I say the big tower can harmonize for 250 or 300 plus miles, does that mean you put one in New York City and everything's harmonized for that range? No, right? It basically, because you always have to look at it from an energetic point of view. New York City, very different energetic environment than a ranch in Wyoming, for example, right? So you have to, in a way, look at how much distorted energy is in that area and how much one big tower brings in. So to harmonize everything, New York will probably need like 25 or 30 of the big towers, but at least this big tower, you know, for a fairly large range, we would have to test it. It's going to be different everywhere to where everything is harmonized, right? And we actually had, most of you ever heard of a building biologist? So building biology is very popular in Europe, which basically, I talked about those positive energy lines in nature. You also have detrimental ones. Some of you might have ever heard of the Hartmann grid or the Curie grid. These are some of those detrimental energy lines. And Hartmann was a German a doctor, and he actually, in 2 towns, he found 100% correlation between people sleeping on an intersection of what they now call the Hartmann grid, which is a grid of detrimental energy lines. And there was 100% correlation between where that intersection of those lines was and that corresponding organ, people developing cancer in that organ, right? By sleeping on that intersection. Because think about when I was talking about the positive energy lines in the sacred power spots, you have this vortex that's life-giving. With the detrimental energy lines, think of it also creating a vortex, but that sucks the life force out of you, right? So let's say your liver is sleeping on those lines continuously, it's a drain on that energy, and you know the energy is going to drop below a certain level, and cells have to switch how they produce energy, and that we call that cancer. All right. Now the issue is that those lines have become even more detrimental because of like all the Wi-Fi, all the electricity and stuff. It resonates with that quality, so they're 10 times more obnoxious than they used to be. So in Europe, we have a long tradition of building biologists, which is you bring a person like that into your home, and they're going to measure how all these lines run, and then they're going to neutralize them. Right? So that's been around for decades in Europe, if not longer. So the funny thing is, like, we had a building biologist that bought one of these towers, and he was so excited about it that he ended up within a half year buying one of the 7-foot ones. And he noticed, and like total nerd like me, like, so he would measure how far his tower neutralized all the 5G towers, like in his little city, in his area. So he got really excited. And the towers, in a way, they work as a network, and they're conscious, right? So you can set your intention with it. You can work with the energy. And so he had this big tower, and then he was reading about these three areas in Germany that had decommissioned nuclear sites. So the nuclear power plants were no longer running, but the fuel rods were still on site. Plus, think about the electrosmog created by EMF. Think about the smog created by a nuclear power plant, where you're splitting atoms, electrons all day long. So And like any government, German government in those areas, oh, everything is safe, everything's well below the established values. But he kept reading in the newspaper how everybody was just dying in those areas of cancer at a very young age. He's like, something's off there. So he went to do his own measurements using this radiesthesia that I talked about. He couldn't get in his car fast enough. He's like, I don't know how anybody. Luckily, he was in Germany when there's no speed limit on the highway, and he could just like bolt out of there. But then what he did was he worked with his big tower and the network and focused on those 3 areas. And he actually was able to harmonize all of that in 3 days' time. Right? And we didn't know about any of this, neither did the inventor, until one day get this whole report sent in, all his findings, all his measurements, and his success that he had with like the nuclear plants. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because so many people, when you talk about the future, they're all, oh, it looks terrible and this and that. I was like, what are you talking about? The future looks great. And I was like, you weird. Like, why do you say it looks great? I was like, because for every single problem we have in this world, we already have the solution. It's either locked away under national security as a patent, right? Because it threatens national security. No, it threatens the medical establishment and the energy. Like we've had free energy since the early 1900s. Tesla figured that out already. So that's what excited me really about this project, is because we're building this grid. Right. And it's a more systemic way of dealing with EMFs. And the fact, like now we have about 50 of the large towers in the US. And then we actually have people that work with these networks, a lot of people that measure energy for themselves. And they focus on certain lakes. They measure the level of consciousness, the life force, the energetic qualities. And then they'll work with the towers and some other things that they do, and they work on it for a few weeks and then measure again and see all the changes in it. And that's what I love about it, to where I think this world's going to shift for the better, but we got to get off our knees and stop giving our power away, to politicians and doctors and what have you, right? I mean, we're going to shift this world, but it's all of us that are waking up, and that each of us, we have our own gifts that we're going to contribute. And that's what I love about projects like this, because we're going to fix this whole EMF thing ourselves and harmonize it. And I really see the cosmic towers as training wheels, because there's nothing a cosmic tower does that we cannot do inherently and innately, right? So I see them as training wheels, and all of us are going to become the new harmonizing grid, right? And we can harmonize all these effects and go far beyond. But it's sure nice to have help in the meantime, and that's where the towers come in. So I'll talk about the sizes real quick, and I would love to invite you up and to share your story, and then I'll also answer some questions, because I'm sure there's going to be some questions. So if we look at the different sizes of the towers, I mean, the smallest one sticks out immediately in a way, but that's actually the last tower to be developed, right? So we had, the inventor had these that are for the home. So this one goes about 100 yards in every direction. So think of it as a bubble, up, down, in every direction, 360 degrees, about 100 yards where it harmonizes all of the energies. This one, 400 to 600 yards. So it's 6 times more powerful than this one. So it's 400 to 600 yards. Why can I not give you an exact number? Because it depends where you are. If you're in LA or you're out in nature, right? This one for me in Egypt, and I'd also put it on where I measure the sacred power spots. And we were in a dome house that was built with natural materials, but this one would go nearly a mile in every direction for me there. Also, there's no 5G in Luxor, so it all depends, right, on your environment, but at least like 400 yards. And then this one was built after, because the inventor kept coming requests like, we love it at home and we have our towers, but I have to go to work and I cannot take my tower with me. And then I have to go travel for work, and it's not allowed on the airplane. So this one was designed in a way that you can take it and carry on the airplane. But it's just really made to protect your field while you're outside of the range of your bigger towers, so you don't get better and then you leave again, and then you get worse. So this one, in a way, because what determines how powerful a tower is how much water is inside and how far the vessels are spread apart. So here, very little water in it. They're pretty close together. So it's really to protect your personal aura while you're outside of the range of your bigger tower. But to get really like the full benefits, to build your aura back up in your life force, you need one of the bigger towers to do that. So this is just to keep you from going backwards when you're outside of the range. And then we have the 7 and the 8 foot towers, which go like 250 miles or like 330 miles in diameter. And together they form a network in a way. So when you have the bigger towers in your area, that supports the smaller ones because they take a lot of the heavy lifting off the like smaller towers, which really helps the smaller towers also to focus more on your personal needs and for your family. We have tons of healers that use them because it's so much easier to keep your space clear and to keep yourself clear, right? And to have an ally. And then, yeah, we'll go into answering your questions and sharing some experiences a little later. I'll take a little break here, and I'd love for you to come up and share about your experience. Thank you for listening to me.
I'll set up the backstory so my story makes sense. Where do I start? So my journey with water actually started with the machine that makes the hydrogen water that you're all drinking. I lived north of Asheville in a town called Burnsville, and the woman that I bought the machine from also sells them. I had a corporate job, right? Not gonna quit. I can't afford to quit this job. Been doing this 11 years. Also in cybersecurity, Nico. Hurricane Helene comes 10 days after I'm laid off from that corporate job. So I was like, the universe is telling me everything has to start again, right? I went to school here in Wilmington. I come back down. And the woman who sold me the machine, I call her up and I'm like, I need to do something for work. She's like, you need to call my business partner, Alex. So Alex was working with her with that machine in that area and working with our Michelle here. And he had stayed with her after the hurricane to have somewhere to stay. Okay. So Ashley tells me to call Alex, and I do. And he shows up with his blue water bottle, and I've got mine. So already it's like, okay, cool. This person like cares about what they drink, of course, with the same machine. So just telling me about keeping the energetics of your water here. Starts a water filtration business. Some of you have our water filter. When Nico talks about this, like in New York, that you would need more, I kind of think about it as water filtration, like the contaminant load. That's kind of how my brain was working when he was telling that story. Like, how much is it dealing with? That's how long it's going to last. Okay, so that's like April of last year. July rolls around. Alex had already been working in the energetics of water and met everyone at the Wellness Enterprise. He's like, Nico's coming to Wilmington, and I'm going to interview him. And there was this huge rainstorm that night. I think it was like July. And our plan was the next day, I was going to go over to his house. We were going to make breakfast. He had a conference call with a client, just like a 15-minute. And then we were going to go do our, prospecting and working on what we needed to build the business, right? So he's off doing something in his office, and I'm making breakfast, and I'm like incredibly hot. Well, it's July, and I'm cooking, and I'm like, I'm really sick. So don't let this steer you away from what I'm gonna tell you. It ends up being good. So I'm feeling really sick, and I'm like, Alex, I don't feel good. And he's like, do you have a stomach bug? And I'm like, it really just hit me like as soon as I got here. I don't know what happened. And I think I need to go home, actually. But I want to see the tower first. And he's like, it's over there in a box. And he's like running around his house. And I'm like, yeah, I know it's in the box, but for some reason I thought you had to plug it in. So Nico told you before, like, why? Okay, I just thought you had to plug it in for it to work. So I'm like, I feel really bad. I need to leave, but plug it in. I want to see what it does, because I'm thinking like I'm going to see something. And he's like, looking at me all confused. He's like, it's already working. And I'm like, I think that's why I don't feel good. And he's like, there's no way. There's no way. Now, in retrospect, if you watch that interview, you guys are talking about that. You guys are talking about how some people can feel it immediately, but Alex, the skeptic that he is like, there's just no way. And I'm like, I really need to go home. So he goes, do you want me to cancel my conference call? I'm like, no, I'm just gonna get in my car and I will call you if something happens, but I'll text you that I get home okay. So I'm leaving his house, I'm driving down the road, and I'm like, it's just moving up like each chakra, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm really gonna get sick. And I'm driving through his neighborhood and I stop at the entrance of the neighborhood and I push the door open. You know what I think I'm gonna do, right? I'm like, and just this burp comes out. I really thought I was going to get sick. And I'm like, that was weird. So continue to drive home. I lived like 15 minutes away from him. Halfway home, same thing. Starts again, root chakra, starts moving up. And I'm like, all right, something's moving, right? I knew something needed to get out of me. And then it comes right at the throat chakra and it was like, oh. Get to my house. At this point, his conference call's over. I text him, I'm like, I'm home okay. And guess what? I feel absolutely fine. And he's like, what happened? I was like, I really think it was the cosmic tower. And he's just still like, no, there's absolutely no way. And I was like, well, I'm gonna stay home now, but I wanna borrow it from you as soon as I can because I wanna do that again. I'm a full believer in energetics that it's not all gonna be rainbows and unicorns. You're gonna have your peeling off the layers, right? So I wanted to do it again. I was like, something needs to come out of me. He's like, yeah, well, I want to keep it for a couple of days. So he calls me like 3 days later and he goes, do you want to borrow it? And I said, yeah, I'm ready. And he was like, I don't want it in my house right now. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to sell these things very well. And he's like, it's just a lot. So he brings it over and I have a whole like moment with myself for about a week. And then he calls me and he's like, I want it back. And I was like, no, it is living in my living room and you cannot have it. And he was like, well, it's mine and I would like it back. So he comes and gets it back. So the whole point is sometimes you need to have something taken away for you to understand the experience. So when he takes it away from my house, I really felt something pull away, not just all of the things that I need to release, but I felt like all of that smog was coming back in. Also, I was in an apartment and my neighbors were a complete domestic violence situation that would keep me up at all hours. And I was like, I can't sleep. I'm hearing all of this noise. I'm hearing people, I don't know if they had elephants rolling on coat hangers in their apartment, skateboarding across the floor, all kinds of noise. So he goes, well, okay. He did his thing with it. He also has a PEMF mat. And he was like, what if I bring you the PEMF mat and the tower? So I'm on my couch. I've got like the tower at the end. I've got the PEMF mat. I slept through all of their, like, you need to call the cops arguing level. I could hear it, but my nervous system was fine. So we've switched it back and forth quite a bit since then. And every single time the other one calls the other, like, I'm just going through something like with my nervous system and I need it back. So yes, I had that initial like purge, but I think it was bringing, I'm sure you have a better explanation, Nico, but it's one of those things now, like you cannot take it, which Alex takes it away from me. I need to get my own. So I just moved into this house. It's Chris's home. He's got the dome, which we'll go outside and see if you haven't seen it already. Alex was following a podcast where Ben, who developed that, right? And he goes, guess what? There's someone here in Wilmington that built one. I'm like, you find all the cool people. So there's an interview with Nico on Alex's website, an interview with Chris and a cerebral spinal fluid specialist, as well as another interview with James's father about structured water and coherence. It's very interesting. But I brought Alex's tower over here a week ago to harmonize this space, and the water filtration system is in. It is rated for removing, or reducing, I should say, Gen X and PFAS in this area. So the water that you're drinking, we call it like 3 parts, right? You've got clean water, you've got the molecular hydrogen for the medical aspects, and it is coherent because it has been in this field for a week. So if you feel anything when you go home, if you have a little tiff with somebody or you have a little introspection, just remember that you were here. You just experienced 3 amazing things in your body, but it's normal, and hopefully you'll want to do it again, and we will have more events like this, and you can come experience this space.
Thank you to Nico and the Wellness Enterprise for bringing coherence technology to us and allowing us to host them. Thanks to Chris and Michelle for the space and organizing the event. If you'd like more information about protecting yourself from non-native EMF, about toroidal fields, coherence, restoring the intelligence of nature, and being part of rebuilding the light grid and serving as part of the communication network that we talked about, see the description for more details, and we'll see you in future videos.